Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen Kingcast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review a different entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication.
And this week, we are looking at The Body from 1983's collection of novellas, Different Seasons. Now, in this collection, we have Shawshank Redemption, and we have Apt Pupil. We have The Body, and then the fourth one is The Breathing Method. This podcast is the last review that I'm doing of any of these stories from Different Seasons. I've reviewed Shawshank Redemption, Rita Hayworth in the Shawshank Redemption. I apologize. I've reviewed Apt Pupil, and here I'm reviewing The Body. I've also reviewed Shawshank Redemption, the movie, Apt Pupil, the movie, and stay tuned next week as I review Rob Reiner's 1986 classic, Stand By Me. I'm not going to be reviewing The Breathing Method because it's a story that I find very boring. It doesn't really do anything for me, and I want to make sure that this podcast, is something that I enjoy doing. I don't want to feel as though I'm, punishing myself. And to be perfectly honest, I want to move on from Different Seasons. The podcast episodes are coming out, week by week. But I've been really working with this particular publication since early September, and as I record this, it's mid-October. So I want to move on to the next publication. But Stand By Me, The Body. It's a classic, and it is the novella that a lot of people point to when they run into non-Stephen King fans who talk about, I don't like Stephen King, he's scary, he's that guy that likes to scare us, I don't like blood and gut stuff. And this novella, along with Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, tend to be the two examples that people give to provide a counter argument to the belief that Stephen King is just a horror writer, just, a scare tactician, that there's something else to him. And this novella is beloved by a lot of Stephen King fans. And, they say that this means something to them. And I know a lot of people that it means something to them. And this novella, of course, was taken by Rob Reiner and spread to the masses with 1986's Stand By Me, which I feel, I'll get into the review of that next week, so make sure that you stick around. Now, before I get into The Body itself, I feel as though Stephen King is working towards something. All right, in 1986, he's going to publish It. And It, I don't know. Part of it is because I have a real preference to It, partially because that was the first Stephen King anything that I had read. But if you ask people what their favorite Stephen King novel is, a lot of them are going to say It. There's something special about it. And I think that he worked through some tropes, and he created some concepts and some archetypes that he took and he carried into It. And so I just see The Body really as it's a rough draft for what he's going to do later on. So it's a rough draft that he's just later going to polish and perfect when it comes time for It. So before I get any further into the review, I'm going to read the Wikipedia summary.
The Body is a novella by American writer Stephen King, originally published in 1982 collection Different Seasons, and in 1986 adapted into the film Stand By Me. Some changes were made to the plot of the film, including changing the setting date from 1960 to 1959 and the location of Castle Rock from Maine to Oregon. The story takes place during the summer of 1960 in the fictional town of Castle Rock, Maine, after a boy from Chamberlain, Maine named Ray Bauer disappears and is presumed dead. Gordy LaChance and his three friends, Chris Chambers, Teddy Duchamp, and Vern Tessio, set out to find his body after telling their parents they will be camping out. During the course of their journey, the boys, who all come from abusive, dysfunctional families, come to grips with some of the harsh truths of growing up in a small factory town that does not seem to offer them much in the way of a future. In comparison to King's prior works, the narrative of the body is complicated in so that it is told in the first-person point of view by the now 40-something-year-old novelist Gordy LaChance. Most of the story is a straight retrospective of what happened, but comments or entire chapters that relate to the present time are interspersed throughout. Although he was only 12 at the time of the story, Gordy's favorite diversion is writing and storytelling. 3 times during the narrative, he tells stories to his friends, and 2 stories are presented in the text as short stories by Gordon LaChance, complete with attribution to the magazines in which they were published. But here's the actual plot. Vern Tessio informs his 3 friends that he has overheard from his older brother Billy talking with his friend Charlie Hogan about the location of the corpse of Ray Brower, a boy from Chamberlain, a town 40 miles or so east of Castle Rock, who has gone missing while going out to pick blueberries with one of his mother's pails. The 4 friends decide that they will find it so as to be famous. The boys walk along the railroad tracks toward the presumed location of the corpse. Along the way, they trespass at the town dump and are chased by a man, Milo Pressman's dog, Chopper. Milo insults Teddy's father, which causes Teddy to unleash his anger on Milo. Gordy and Vern are nearly run over by a train while crossing a bridge. While at a resting point, Chris predicts that Gordy will grow up to become a famous writer. Perhaps he will even write about his friends one day. When they finally find the spot where the body lies, a gang of bullies arrives just after they do. The gang is comprised of Vern's older brother Billy, Charlie Hogan, Chris's older brother Richard, Eyeball Chambers, Norman Fuzzy Brackowitz, John Ace Merrill, and 2 others. The older boys are upset to see the 4 friends, and during an argument, Chris pulls a gun belonging to his father from his bag and fires into the air. Chris then threatens Ace, the leader of the gang. After a brief standoff, Ace realizes that Chris is serious and the teenagers leave. Having seen the body, the boys realize that there's nothing else to be done with it and return home without further incident. The older boys decide to phone the location of the body as an anonymous tip, and it's eventually found by the authorities as a result. Some days after the confrontation, Ace and Fuzzy break Gordy's nose and fingers and kick him in the testicles, and are on the verge of harming him more seriously when they are run off by Gordy's neighbor, Aunt Evie Chambers. Chris's brother breaks his arm and leaves his face looking like a Canadian sunrise. Ted and Vern get less severe beatings. The boys refuse to identify their assailants to the authorities, and there are no further repercussions. The narration then goes into fast forward. Gordon describes the next year or so briefly, stating that Ted and Vern drift off befriending some of the younger boys. In high school, just as Chris predicted, Gordon begins taking college preparation courses. Unexpectedly, so does Chris. In spite of the abuse from his father, taunts from his classmates, and distrust from his teachers and school counselors, he manages to be successful with the help of Gordon. He mentions that Ace spent time in prison, and by the time he's released, he's a mess. The final 2 chapters describe the fate of Gordon's 3 friends, none of whom survived past young adulthood. Vern is killed in a house fire after a party. Teddy, while under the influence of alcohol and drugs, crashes his car, and he and his passengers are killed. Chris, who became an outstanding high school and college student, was in his 2nd year of law school, is stabbed to death after trying to stop an argument in a fast food restaurant. Gordon, the only survivor, continues to write stories through college and publishes a number of them in a small literary journal and men's magazines. His first novel becomes a bestseller and a successful film. At the time of writing about the events of 1960, he has written 7 novels about the supernatural. Gordon has a wife and 3 children. Gordon is also revealed to be a veteran of the Vietnam War and the counterculture of the 1960s, occasionally referred to in the flash-forward narratives during the main story. So I'm just going to dive right into it. The body, what it really is a quest. It's a quest of our characters heading off into the wilderness, and it follows a very familiar archetypal structure of that of the hero's journey. There are 3 events leading up to the climax.
The scene at the junkyard, you have the train scene, and you have the leeches, and ultimately that leads right to the reveal of the body itself, and when they confront the body, they also confront their bullies, and then everything after that is the resolution. So it's a pretty tightly knit little story that follows the traditional plot structure, and it's So basically, it begins with an italicized section set in the present, and we know immediately that's the narrator looking back on his past. It then cuts to the past, and we are placed in Castle Rock, the town previously established in the Dead Zone in Cujo, though the events of this story take place years before either of those novels. Early on, I noticed that King references Dandelion Wine early on, which to me is just a shout out to Ray Bradbury, who was a major influence of Stephen King, and whose novel, Dandelion Wine, is the template for the coming-of-age tale, which Stephen King uses to great effect. And like Ray Bradbury, Stephen King loves creating fictional towns and populating them with rich characters. Greensville, off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I'm not doing my research on this, but oh my God, Greensville, Illinois, I want to say is the name of Ray Bradbury's little town that he likes to write of, just like Castle Rock is for Stephen King. So as always, King paints a scene and places the reader firmly in that scene. And the first scene that he puts us in is the treehouse, right? And the boys that we start to get to know, Chris, Gordy, and Teddy, are all very well realized characters. And Vern, Teddy, we learn, has suffered a horrific attack from his father, who had shoved both sides of his head against the stove, melting his ears in the process. Now, this is such a specific injury that sets the character apart from other characters that you might have read that have suffered abuse. So it really sets him apart. And, King doesn't waste time detailing his character traits either. He's fun-loving, he's a risk-taker, he'd do anything on the dare, right? He's hot-headed. So we learn who Teddy is right away. Then we meet Vern, and with Vern, the thrust of the story reveals itself, right? Along with the revelation, that our narrator's older brother has died earlier that spring. I cried when I heard, and I cried more at the funeral, and I couldn't believe that Dennis was gone, that anyone that used to knuckle my head or scare me with a rubber spider until I cried or give me a kiss when I fell down and scraped both knees bloody and whisper in my ear, "Now stop crying, you baby," that a person who had touched me could be dead. It hurt and it scared me that he could be dead, but it seemed to have taken out all of the heart of my parents. For me, Dennis was hardly more than an acquaintance. He was 10 years older than me, if you can dig it, and he had his own friends and classmates. We ate at the same table for a lot of years, and sometimes he was my friend and sometimes my tormentor, but mostly he was, just a guy. When he died, he'd been gone for a year, except for a couple of furloughs. We didn't even look alike. It took me a long time after that summer to realize that most of the tears I cried were for my mom and my dad. Fat lot of good it did them, or me. So, this information, combined with the quest to find the dead body offered by Vern, tells us that this will be the tale of a character's growth from childhood to adulthood, the body being the symbolic death of his childhood, the confirmation of his eventual future. After the boys make the decision to find the body, the readers are given a section of Gordy's first story about a boy named Chico with brother issues. Gordy later criticizes his own story, and I'm glad that he did.
The finals are Monday night, and now you can trade on football legally, nationwide, on Kalshi. Right now, Miami is trading at 27% to beat Indiana. That means a $100 trade pays out $352 with the win. On Kalshi, you're trading against your peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the odds change, you can buy in and out of your position all game long. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app, use code IHEART to get $20 when you trade 100. Kalshi, Kalshi. Trade on anything.
I don't know. I wanted to love reading this story. I have not read this story, and I mean the body, since I first read it when I was around Gordy's age, right? And I got to the scene, and I was into it, right? And I got to the scene where all of a sudden it's about Chico. And it was just, my experience just came screeching to a halt. And I just stopped caring, and I started to get frustrated because this to me it seemed very indulgent. Stephen King is going to illustrate, Gordy's storytelling abilities with the lard-ass Hogan scene later on. But this, to include a scene that is so on the nose, right? The death of the brother, it had already been established very, very well, subtly. This, like I said, is just, it's a little bit too obvious, and just shoving it down our throats. It's not something that I really liked reading. And I don't know exactly what he was trying to do with it, but it definitely wasn't working for me. Now, on page 328, Stephen King provides us a wonderful description of Castle Rock, which is important because this is a town that we are going to be spending a lot of time with. We've already spent time in Castle Rock, in Cujo, in the Dead Zone, and we'll be seeing Castle Rock again in the Dark Half, in Needful Things. It's an important town in the Stephen King universe, so it's important that we get, wonderfully rich descriptions, such as, behind us was Castle Rock, spread out on the long hill that was known as Castle View, surrounding its green and shady common. Further down Castle River, you could see the stacks of the woolen mill spewing smoke into the sky the color of gunmetal and spewing waste into the water. The jolly furniture barn was on our left, and straight ahead of us the railroad tracks, bright and heliographing in the sun. They paralleled the Castle River, which was on our left. To the right was a lot of overgrown scrubland. There's motorcycle track there today. They have old scrambles every Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. An old abandoned water tower stood on the horizon, rusty and somehow scary. So, little descriptions like that go a long way in putting together a geography of Castle Rock. It's very important for us to be able to have that. And his talents as a writer are on full display in the story, even though it's not a very long story. But we have a great description of summer here on page 338. But there was more to that summer than our trip across the river to look for Ray Brower, although that looms the largest. Sounds of the Fleetwoods singing Come Softly to Me, and Robin Luke singing Susie Darlin', and little Anthony popping the vocal on I Ran All the Way Home. Were they all the hits in that summer in 1960? Yes and no. Mostly yes. In the long purple evenings when rock and roll from WLAM blurred into the night baseball from WCOU, time shifted. I think it was all 1960, and that the summer went on for a space of years, held magically intact in a web of sounds, the sweet hum of crickets, the machine gun roar of playing cards, riffling against spokes of some kid's bicycle as he pedaled home for the late summer of cold cuts and iced tea, the flat Texas voice of Buddy Knott singing, Come along and be my party doll, and I'll make love to you, and the baseball announcer's voice mingling with the song and with the smell of the freshly cut grass. This is very much Stephen King's past. He is very much working through his own memory and bringing it to the forefront. It's his love letter to his childhood, but there's a timeless quality here, right? That I think that we can all plug into, and it's scenes like this that make this story what it is. Now, King provides 2 scenes in a row where we see the faults of adults. So it's apparent now that it serves the same function to the narrative as a rain cloud on a sunny day. The golden summer that represented their youth is going to be washed away into the gray world of adulthood, where cashiers try to scam their customers and landfill managers sick their attack dogs on children. But I don't know. It's funny to me at this point. I'm at the age where I can't relate to the kids the way that I'm supposed to. In the case of Milo, the manager of the dump, I believe that we're supposed to be on the boys' side, rebelling against this awful man. I just see a guy of low stature, probably someone who doesn't have much self-respect, just getting taunted by children after they hurt his dog. There's nothing worse than being mocked by children when you're mad at them, trust me. Now, I understand he's not a sympathetic character, but Teddy is so obnoxious in this scene that I can't help but side with Milo. Which, I don't know, it's funny, because, of course, like, I read that, as a kid, and I'm all about the kids, but here I'm like, I'm almost shaking my fist like the angry old man on the porch for the kids on my lawn, right? But, King makes me feel bad about myself right away as soon as I feel that. When Teddy breaks down in tears in the next scene, it's authentic because immediately the kids don't know what to do. Now, I remember distinctly as a kid having no idea what to do when a friend started crying. My instinct was to get help. But for these boys, there is no getting help. They're on the train tracks to their adulthood. As they head into the woods, they head into their own future, and they can never turn back. Trains don't run backwards, after all. And he makes this metaphor explicit on page 399. There's a high ritual to all fundamental events, the rites of passage, the magic corridor where all the change happens, buying the condoms, standing before the minister, raising your hand and taking the oath. Or, if you please, walking down the railroad tracks to meet a fellow your own age halfway. The same as I'd walk halfway over to Pine Street to meet Chris if he was coming over to my house. Or the way Teddy would walk halfway down to Gate Street to meet me if I was going to his. It seemed right to do it this way, because the rite of passage is a magic corridor, and so we always provide an aisle. It's what you walk down when you get married, what they carry you down when you get buried. Our corridor was those twin rails, and we walked between them, just hopping along toward whatever this was supposed to mean. You don't hitchhike your way to a thing like that, maybe. And maybe we thought it was also right that it should have turned out to be harder than we had expected. Events surrounding our hike had turned into what we had suspected was all along. Serious business. Now, speaking of trains, the scene in which they cross the river has to be the best out of the entire novella. Specifically, the passage in which Gordy relates the experience that comes when he realizes that the train is on its way. Now look, this isn't a horror novel, but it's not without suspense. And the scene is incredible. Now, after the train scene comes the crux of this story. It's not about a boy mourning the loss of his brother, or even the search for a body. It's about the reality of the future and the realization that you can't always bring everything you want into it. There have to be sacrifices. In the case of Gordy, he is faced with the fact that soon he will have to sacrifice his friends in order to fulfill his potential. To a child whose only life is defined by his friendships, this is a terrifying idea, but it's a necessary one. Between pages 376 and 379, Chris lays it all out for Gordy, specifically stating that, "Your friends drag you down, Gordy. Don't you know that?" He pointed at Vern and Teddy, who were standing and waiting for us to catch up. They were laughing about something. In fact, Vern was just about busting a gut. "Your friends do. They're like drowning guys that are holding onto your legs. You can't save them. You can only drown with them."
Running a business is hard enough, so why make it harder with a dozen different apps that don't talk to each other? One for sales, another for inventory, a separate one for accounting. Before you know it, you are drowning in software instead of growing your business. This is where Odoo comes in. Odoo is the only business software you'll ever need. It's an all-in-one, fully integrated platform that handles everything. CRM, accounting, inventory, e-commerce, HR, and more. No more app overload. No more juggling logins. Just one seamless system that makes work easier. And the best part, Odoo replaces multiple expensive platforms for a fraction of the cost. It's built to grow with your business, whether you are just starting out or already scaling up. Plus, it's easy to use, customizable, and designed to streamline every process, so you can focus on what really matters, running your business. Thousands of businesses have made the switch, so why not you? Try Odoo for free at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
So, like I said, if this hadn't been pointed out to him by Chris, Gordy might have thrown his life away. But Chris is the one to break it to him, saving him, just as he had saved Teddy when he had caught him falling out of the tree. Oh my God. So it's a great conversation between Chris and Gordy. But, just in case we didn't get it, this conversation is then hammered over our heads, shoved down our throats, and screamed at us from the mountaintops, just in case we didn't get it. We get a dream sequence that is so on the nose, it takes away the conflict that King is trying to establish, the conflict that he'd already established with the conversation between he and Chris. So what was very organic and natural and poignant, in that moment is just... It's a chance to just kind of create a creepy scene that to me I didn't think was really warranted, and I wish that it wasn't included. Now, eventually they arrive at the body, and once they do, their journey's at an end, right? They have one final test before they exit their childhoods, and that comes with the confrontation between the boys and the bullies. But it's more than just bully versus victim. It's a fight of control over their own futures. Will they be subservient to the authorities that have already been presented to us as corrupt, here on display in the form of the bullies? Or will they buck the conformity and live life on their own terms? And Chris takes charge here with the gun, which becomes a very, very adult moment. And with it, they take control of their lives. And after that, they go their separate ways, each one on their own path. And unfortunately, only one of the four has a path that extends further than the others. Now, I'm going to talk, like, very briefly about some of the characters here. So, I mean, Gordy, we learned that Gordy, everything that we need to know about him is because of his brother, right? He's suffering the loss of his older brother while his parents have retreated inward. If they were ever present in his life, they aren't any longer, and they were barely present when the brother was alive. And the thing is that they're old enough to be his grandparents. They're distant and apathetic to Gordy, choosing instead to live with the ghost of the dead brother. King even makes a point to have a scene in which Gordy's father is watering a dead garden. It's not as if Dennis had made his life better. Even when he was alive, Gordy lived in his shadow. So this is a character that is, just on the verge, of so much. He's in constant pain. So he needs this quest. He needs to go out. He needs to, for him, it's a way to embrace life, even when he's seeking, in a way, death, right? And when it comes to Chris, King waits to give us anything about Chris, other than his name at first. First we meet, Gordy, and then Teddy, then Vern, and then he really starts to get into Chris. After all the other characters, we learn about Chris's father, who, as King puts it, was always on a mean streak, often beating Chris so bad he had to stay home from school. The only thing worse than his father is his family's reputation, and in the eyes of the townsfolk, he's just as bad. But this is a character that is brave, smart, loyal, and heroic. King makes the point to relate a time in which Chris had almost magically saved Teddy's life by managing to grab a handful of hair as Teddy plummeted from a tree. So, when we eventually meet the body, right, with the discovery of the body, Gordy is able to come to terms with the loss of his brother. Furthermore, he's come to the end of his childhood, a path that ends with a literal child's body that serves as a metaphor for his own death of sorts. The implication of this body suggests that the boys are entering a world of adulthood, one that is cold and dangerous, where older brothers die and fathers can melt the ears off their children. It's the climax, as I said earlier, to this story. And with it, the concept of death becomes a reality. So now I'm going to get into the King-isms that I've found within this particular story. And the first and foremost, the most important one here, and actually to take a step back, King-isms are what I call just patterns that Stephen King repeats, right? Tropes, traits of his writing. So first is Castle Rock, right? On page 333, he even references Cujo, and Cujo, in terms of when this is taking place, hasn't happened yet. To present day Gordy, it has happened, and so he's able to actually reference Cujo when talking about, the name of the dog that I can't think of, Chomper. And we have Ace Merrill, Ace, who first appears here, who will later, spoiler alert, appear in Needful Things. Mrs. Chalmers makes an appearance here, who is a minor character in both Cujo and Needful Things, aunt of Needful Things character Polly. So, Castle Rock is... This is like not the first real one, but this is the first real one where Stephen King sort of develops the heart of Castle Rock. And, he's definitely going to kind of go back to this Castle Rock when it comes time for Needful Things. Second Kingism is the magic of childhood. Like I said, this is the template that's going to later be used for It. Everything about this book is a prototype for that story. The dead brother, the last summer of childhood, the mythology of the best friends that cannot last, the bullies. The only thing missing from this story is a supernatural child-eating clown. But everything else is so similar. And yeah, it's a huge Stephen Kingism. 3, we have Stephen King referencing Chamberlain, Maine, which is the hometown of prom queen herself, Carrie White. Number 4 is a very favorite Stephen Kingism, and it's that of bullies. And we see bullies in a lot of his work. We saw bullies in Carrie. We saw a bully briefly in Salem's Lot. We've seen bullies in Greg Stilson in The Dead Zone as a sort of bully. And, you know, there was bullies in short stories, in Night Shift specifically. Sometimes they come back. And bullies rear their ugly head again. This is not the last time we will see bullies. As I mentioned earlier, we will see bullies again when it comes time for It. And speaking of It, Derry is mentioned, and I believe this is the first time Derry has been mentioned, unless I'm wrong. But I don't recall seeing Derry before this time, and it's just one line, and it's never mentioned again. I don't even know if Stephen King was aware of it, but Derry, of course, is the city that stars. It's the setting of It, which much like Castle Rock, much like Salem's Lot, is a character unto itself. The number 6 Stephen Kingism is Ayuh. Okay, Ayuh. Just a little dialectical choice on the part of Stephen King to illustrate the mainness of his characters. Number 7, another popular Stephen Kingism, is that the main character is a writer. You know, through Gordy, King is able to speak about writing in a way that Ben Mears from Salem's Lot or Jack Torrance from The Shining had not been able to. With Gordy, the novella gets metatextual. So, for instance, the boys joke about the impracticality of the name of the fictional town Gordy used for his stories, which is then turned on its ear when Gordy starts making fun of the real, quote-unquote, town names such as Castle Rock and Jerusalem's Lot. Furthermore, Vern becomes the petulant reader demanding to know what happens after the end, infuriated with the storyteller for not knowing what happens next. And Gordy even refers to his readers as gentle reader, which Stephen King will adopt later as constant reader. So this was a way for Stephen King to pour a lot of himself into, as he tends to whenever it comes with the writer as the main character. Our 8th Stephen Kingism is alcoholism. All right, we have definitely seen this manifest itself before. We've seen it in Salem's Lot with Father Callahan. We've seen it with Jack Torrance in The Shining. We see it here in The Body. Chris is terrified of being an alcoholic because his father is an alcoholic, so it's something that he's clearly struggling with. The character, Chris. Number 9, page 388, we have the use of the N-word, and I am so over it. All right, the two of the boys are talking to each other, and I can't. Sorry, I'm just kind of like losing my thoughts here. So I've talked about this before on the Kingcast, and I've had listeners actually write in to share their thoughts, which I really appreciate. Because, again, I do not believe that Stephen King is a racist at all. And, in fact, with this here, coming of age in the 1960s, he definitely grew up during the era of the Civil Rights Movement. I believe that he stands for everyone. He's an optimistic writer that believes in humanity. I do not believe he's racist, but, man, he tends to use the N-word in order for us to... In this case, I don't even know if we're supposed to dislike a character. He just drops it, and he can. He has every right to. That's a huge debate that is beyond me. Where the rights lie to this word. When can it be used? When it cannot be used? I mean, It's not even a criticism of Stephen King. I'm not necessarily criticizing him. I'm just pointing it out. Right now I'm looking at my Blu-ray collection. I own every movie by Quentin Tarantino. Right? Who. The last movie he made is a movie that I just bought a poster of, Django Unchained, which I think it's a great film. And that movie is littered with the N-word. It is on so much display. It's uncomfortable to watch. And Spike Lee, the filmmaker, hates Quentin Tarantino for his use of the N-word because he feels as though Quentin Tarantino doesn't have the right to use it. So I don't know. You know, it's one of those things. Like, for whatever reason, I think that Quentin Tarantino can get away with it, and yet I get a little uncomfortable whenever Stephen King uses it. So it's definitely something worth talking about. I'm talking about it, and I'm not saying anything about it because I don't even know what to say about it. But it comes up again on page 388 if you're looking for it. And then on, excuse me, on number 11 of Stephen Kingisms, we have reference to The Shawshank Prison, which, of course, Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption is a short story included within this collection as well. So it's the second time within this collection that he's referring to The Shawshank Redemption. He refers to the events of The Shawshank Redemption in Apt Pupil. So those are all of the Stephen Kingisms that I found. I'm sure there are more. I'm definitely sure there are more, but those are the ones that I found, and that's good for now. So the only thing that we have left is the quote. You know, what piece of text boils all of this down to its barest essence? And I think it's a very famous line from the movie. You know, in fact, it's the last line of the movie. So it's a bit popularized, but I think that it speaks to everything that Stephen King was writing about here. And the quote is this: "I never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12. Jesus, did you?" I mean, there's more. I mean, there's more that I think that you could pull out of this. I think that, you know, I read earlier the quote about the friends dragging you down and making you drown. I think that could just as easily be the quote. This one's a lot more optimistic, and it has that wistfulness and the nostalgic piece that I think is important here. So that's what I'm sticking with. So thanks for sticking around, everyone. That's kind of all that I have to say about The Body. But make sure you stick around next week as I head back into Castle Rock to talk about the 1986 Rob Reiner adaptation, Stand By Me.
If you have any thoughts at any point, feel free to write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. You can follow me on Facebook, TikTok, Blue Sky, and on Instagram. If you have any time on your hands, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I will see you here next week where MOON spells Stephen Kingcast.